Chinese Communist leader Xi Jinping warns foreign forces not to bully Beijing. The punishment for doing so, in his words, the blood and flesh of 1.4 billion Chinese people. On the eve of the Chinese regime's anniversary, crowds packed Hong Kong's airport, many of them headed to the UK. Some even paid double the price for their one-way tickets. Extreme weather hits China's coastal Shandong Province. Raging through the day and night, it set a new record for the city's history. A group of Chinese women seen dancing to pro-communist music in New York City. One man filmed them and condemned them online, but Chinese state media soon adopted the clip, adding their own spin. And a lawsuit in Serbia reaches a verdict involving the country's police, 11 European citizens, and the Chinese regime. A filmmaker there tells us the story. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping is delivering a tough speech on his party's 100th anniversary. He is saying the Chinese will never allow foreign influences to bully or enslave them again.
Chinese Communist Party, or CCP head Xi Jinping, is sending a warning message to foreign countries. If they attempt to, as he calls, bully China, they will get their heads bashed.
The Chinese people will never allow any foreign forces to bully, oppress, or enslave us. Anyone who dares to try to do that will have their head bashed bloody against the Great Wall of Steel forged by the flesh and blood of over 1.4 billion Chinese people.
Xi said it on Thursday while celebrating the 100th anniversary of his party. The Chinese regime under Xi has been more assertive on the global stage. And the international community has criticized it for its treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang and for cracking down on Hong Kong with the draconian national security law. The regime has also sent fighter jets and bombers over democratic Taiwan. Beijing has never renounced the use of force to take over Taiwan. But in his hour-long speech at Tiananmen Square, Xi called it peaceful reunification.
All sons and daughters of China, including compatriots from both sides of the Taiwan Strait, must work together and move forward in solidarity, resolutely destroying any conspiracies of Taiwan independence.
Xi was dressed unlike any other CCP official in the ceremony. He put on what people call the Mao suit. That's the way Mao Zedong always dressed. Mao ruled China for nearly 30 years until his death. He was responsible for the death of millions of Chinese people from the 1950s to the 70s. Among major world powers, only Russian President Putin congratulated Xi. It was days ago, during an online meeting.
This year is the CCP's 100th anniversary. I congratulate you on my own behalf.
Chinese state media claim that they have received over 1,000 congratulatory messages, but none of them is from the top leader of a democratic country.
On the eve of the CCP's anniversary, Hong Kong airport was crowded with people heading to the UK. Some of them even paid double the price for their one-way tickets. NTD's Sarah Leung brings us the story from Hong Kong.
The national security law has been implemented in Hong Kong for 1 year. More than 100,000 Hong Kong residents have left the city. The recent Apple Daily incident has led to more people leaving Hong Kong. We have seen a large number of Hong Kong residents arriving at the airport on the eve of July 1st. They are immigrating to the UK. It's Wednesday at Hong Kong airport and people are crowding two counters. There are two direct flights to the UK and another indirect flight that has a layover in Switzerland. At the same time, counters for the other flights are empty. Many relatives and friends saw the passengers off. Mr. Chin's daughter will settle in the UK together with her family. The father couldn't help but wipe away tears. A couple saw their only child off. The mother hugged her son many times. Even after her son had passed through the gate, she couldn't help crying. From July 1st on, British passenger planes are banned from arriving in Hong Kong due to the pandemic. A couple was worried that the ban would also extend to flights from Hong Kong to the UK, so they decided to pay double the price to leave earlier. They told the NTD Hong Kong reporter to be careful.
貴嘅機票都識到。
幾錢一張啊
8000幾。
8000幾，之前呢？之前
維珍嗰啲3000幾又有，BA 4000零5000都有。
More than 20 friends saw a young man off. They gave him a "We love you" greeting card and hugged him one by one. According to a survey, 1/5 of Hong Kong residents plan to leave the city permanently. That's 1.5 million people. It's estimated that 250 to 300,000 Hong Kongers will immigrate to the UK in the next 5 years.
Hong Kong police are arresting a noted protester, Alexandra Wong, more commonly known as Grandma Wong, again. That's after she waved a Union Jack in the city on Thursday. From the police car, she made a famous hand gesture. It represents one of the most well-known protest slogans, 5 demands, not one less. They refer to Hong Kong's demands when they protested against the extradition bill in 2019. Wong became a familiar face at the protests. Police detained her in August of 2019 and kept her in custody for 14 months in China. She returned to Hong Kong October last year. July 1st marks not only the 24th anniversary of the city's handover to the Chinese regime, but also the first anniversary since Beijing imposed the wide-ranging national security law. It allows Beijing to drastically tighten its grip on the financial hub. Traditionally, there would be anti-Beijing protests on every July 1st since the handover. But this year, Hong Kong police canceled the permission. They cited virus restrictions. Exiled Tibetan political leaders in a northern Indian hill town are commenting on the 100th anniversary of the CCP. They say this day marks a century of torture and oppression, and that it is a black day in history.
On the 100th anniversary of the CCP, party leader Xi Jinping claimed that his party has written a splendid chapter in human history. But exiled Tibetan political leaders in India are calling the anniversary instead a black day in history.
I'm sure the Chinese, they are going to show a great show of greatness and development to the world. But then the world should always take into consideration is that there's always the other side of it, the darker side of it.
The CCP celebrated its 100th anniversary on Thursday. For the party, it's about glorifying its past. But what kind of past?
It's a black day in history. We are marking a century of torture and oppression.
Shortly after the CCP took over China in 1949, it sent troops to occupy Tibet in 1950. And a year later, it gained control over Tibet and the devout Buddhists there.
They might show the good side of the development, but in regard to Tibet, after the 1951 bloody invasion of Tibet, though Xi Jinping had talked about ecological civilization, but the ecology of Tibet is almost wholly disturbed, the fragile Himalayan kingdom of Tibet.
Tibet's highest spiritual and political leader, the Dalai Lama, fled to India in 1959. The CCP has rejected criticisms that it has suppressed Tibet's religious freedom and culture. Instead, it says its rule has ended serfdom and brought development to a backward region. But the party still fears that any unrest in the region could pose a threat to its rule.
On the day the CCP turned 100, a human rights group is calling for an end to the regime. They say the CCP causes misfortune not only to China, but also to the entire world. NTD's Don Ma has more.
For the Chinese regime, July 1st is a day of joy and pride. But outside China, sentiments are a little different. Major Western media outlets mark the occasion with criticism abound. And rights advocacy group Christian Justice Alliance went over and beyond in making sure people remember the CCP's violent past. They constructed an eye-catching exhibit in a bustling Chinese community in New York City.
In reality, the Chinese Communist Party has brought great misfortune to the Chinese people and to people around the world. In the past century, hundreds of millions of Chinese people have died in the hands of the CCP. The CCP is a disaster for mankind, not just a disaster for China.
A large banner reads, "The CCP's past 100 years of crimes against humanity." Members are heard chanting, "End the Chinese Communist Party." The demonstration boasts more than 30 exhibition boards with pictures showing the CCP's crimes. But the head of the alliance, Xiao Jun, says they still could not display all the crimes the CCP has committed.
We hope to illustrate all the different crimes the CCP has committed in the past 100 years. We hope that the Chinese people can understand that the CCP is not their so-called mother.
Xiao also says the living conditions of people in communist China are comparable to that of slaves.
It's hard to imagine that in the 21st century, Chinese citizens are living a slave-like lifestyle. This is because they don't have human rights. This makes you a slave. They don't have the right to own land, they don't have freedom of speech, and they don't have reproductive rights. If authorities only let you have one child, then you can only have one. This is a slave-like society.
Topics covered in the exhibit include the Chinese regime's one-child policy and forced abortions, forced demolitions, persecution of religious followers and ethnic minorities, and forced organ harvesting, among others. Don Ma, NTD News.
Strong winds hit eastern China's coastal Shandong Province Wednesday, raging throughout day and night. In the province's capital city, Jinan, strong winds reached over 89 miles per hour. That's the strongest ever recorded in the city's history. And it's even stronger than a typhoon, which is at least 83 miles per hour. On the same day, city authorities also issued an orange hail warning. That's the second highest warning in their system. And there's also a yellow thunder warning, which is the third highest. Online videos show how extreme weather conditions are impacting the city. Coming up, a group of Chinese women were dancing to Chinese communist music in New York City. Chinese state-owned media posted a video of it, but the man who filmed the event was angry. More on that after the break.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
A group of Chinese women were seen dancing to Chinese communist propaganda music in New York City. A local resident filmed the event, saying it was detestable. But he was surprised to see the video he shot showing up on Chinese state-owned media a few hours later.
It was the morning of June 22nd, and New York City resident Cai Gui-hua was in Flushing, a local Chinatown. While there, he spotted a group of Chinese women dancing to the beats of a Chinese communist propaganda song. The lyrics of the song praises the CCP for being the savior of China. Tsai filmed it and posted the video on Twitter. He wrote, "They played the song No Communist Party, No New China and danced to it. They say it was to show their patriotism." He posted another criticism hours later, saying, "This group of foolish loyalists, it's really extremely disgusting to watch."
If you are a believer in the Chinese Communist Party, don't come to the U.S. This country does not want to get invaded by followers of communism.
But later that day, Tsai was surprised to see that multiple CCP mouthpieces, including People's Daily, published the exact same video on their Twitter accounts. Tsai was outraged that these outlets not only used his video without permission, but also omitted his commentary. He's planning to file a lawsuit against Chinese state media for copyright violations. And he also has a message to his fellow Chinese Americans.
So we came to this land of liberty. We should cherish ourselves, show respect, love, and gratitude. Don't be a conscienceless person.
Tsai says no Chinese Americans should pollute the U.S. with Chinese communist culture.
A lawsuit in Serbia involving the Serbian police, 11 European citizens, and the Chinese regime. What are the connections? A filmmaker there tells us the story.
Serbian human rights filmmaker Dejan Markovic has been asking the same question for years. When will this case be over? 7 years later, the results were finally revealed.
The Constitutional Court ruled that the police of Serbia unconstitutionally detained practitioners during the visit of Chinese Prime Minister in Belgrade.
But what exactly happened? Back in 2014, the Chinese premier visited Serbia for a summit. A group of 11 people from other European countries planned a peaceful protest during the summit to oppose the Chinese regime's human rights abuses. But Serbian police detained them to prevent them from protesting.
And they felt like, okay, we will break the laws, but it's a small group of people. We don't care. What's important is the security of Chinese Prime Minister. We shouldn't get them angry about anything.
The summit hosted leaders from China plus 16 Central and Eastern European countries, including Serbia. During the summit, Beijing created a $3 billion investment fund.
Serbian government considered this a big opportunity to improve their image and, of course, to get investments from China. This is the first thing.
Markovic says Serbian police banned all demonstrations ahead of the summit and noted that police removed the 11 Falun Gong practitioners from their hotels after discovering their identities, all with no warrant and no reason except that they all practice Falun Gong. The police also took their phones and blocked them from calling the embassy or anyone else. Markovic says they suddenly vanished for days. Nobody knew where they were. That's even though the group had already canceled their planned activities in light of the ban on demonstrations. Anyone who was involved in Falun Gong in Serbia was put under strict surveillance. Even their family members were being watched.
I felt this is a real thriller, You come to peacefully demonstrate in a country where this was not banned.
Serbia is a post-communist country transitioning to democracy in 1992. Freedom of assembly is written into its constitution.
This is not like Serbia, it is more like China.
Among the 11 detained Falun Gong practitioners, 7 filed a group lawsuit against Serbian police. That's for violating their constitutional rights. They fought the case all the way to Serbia's constitutional court. And 7 years later, the court finally gave its verdict in May, in favor of them. According to the 2020 World Report on Human Rights, the Chinese Communist Party is becoming a global threat to human rights worldwide. Unlike other dictatorships in history or in other parts of the world, Markovic says the CCP isn't just one dictator. It's a whole party that has and will continue doing things behind the scenes without transparency.
They think that they can live forever. That's actually the biggest problem. And this is what drives them to do things as they do. And this is why they are much, much bigger threat than any kind of dictatorship throughout history.
In recent years, China's economic influence has started growing in Southeast Europe. Its $14 trillion economy and status as the world's largest commodity exporter attract many countries hungry for those resources. But sometimes they come at a heavy price.
I'm sending them the message. You cannot be a friend of Chinese Communist Party. They can only use you, and in the end, they will dump you.
As China rapidly invests in Central and Eastern Europe, democracy there seems to be sliding backwards, most notably in Serbia.
European clothing brand H&M's profits have swung back in the second quarter. That's despite the Chinese regime boycotting the brand for its concerns about slave labor in China's western region of Xinjiang. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
Sweden's H&M swung back to profit in the second quarter, beating forecasts. China was one big negative, with sales down about a quarter. The Chinese regime boycotted H&M after the brand raised concerns about forced labor in China's western region of Xinjiang. The US has declared China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims there as genocide. Soon after the boycott started, H&M stores disappeared from China's online maps, including Apple Maps. They also disappeared from China's ride-hailing app Didi. And last month, the Chinese regime accused H&M and other big clothing brands of importing unsafe or poor-quality children's clothes. As a result of the campaign, many Chinese have committed to buying their clothes from domestic producers. China accounted for around 5% of group sales last year. The Wall Street Journal reports that H&M put the cost of standing up to China at $74 million in lost sales. In the last quarter alone, H&M shares fell as much as 4% in early trades on Thursday. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
The United States and Taiwan this week resumed long-delayed trade talks. Washington also voiced support for the democratically governed island. Both sides are seeking to deepen economic ties, despite opposing pressure from Beijing.
Taiwan and the United States held a virtual meeting on Tuesday discussing the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, or TIFA. Trade talks stalled for 5 years following the Obama administration. Taiwan's chief trade negotiator John Deng said Wednesday that the island aspired for a bilateral trade deal with the U.S.
During the meeting, we expressed to the U.S. that Taiwan hopes to sign a trade agreement eventually. We are willing to continue to work hard to build the foundation and proceed step by step towards our goal.
The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative led the virtual talks. In a statement, it noted the two sides discussed a wide range of issues, including creating resilient supply chains and combating forced labor and climate change. A bipartisan group of over 40 U.S. senators sent a letter to U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai this week, urging her to reconvene trade agreement talks with Taipei. Taiwan is a major microchip producer and a member of the World Trade Organization. But many countries are wary of signing trade agreements with the island. That's an attempt to avoid angering Beijing. The Chinese Communist regime claims the island as Chinese territory and says it has no right to its own relations. Prior to the bilateral meeting this week, Beijing urged the United States to stop all forms of official exchange with Taiwan. Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
The UK's finance minister is saying that his government wants to trade with China while maintaining British values. One expert questions whether the UK can have its cake and eat it too. NTD's Eddie Atkin brings us this report.
Chancellor Rishi Sunak says China is one of the most important economies in the world, but also a country with very different values to the UK. During Sunak's annual Mansion House speech on Thursday, he says the UK needs to have a mature and balanced relationship with Beijing. The Chancellor said the UK must be eyes wide open about Beijing's increasing international influence and continue to take a principled stand on issues we judge to contravene our values. Chinese politics expert Grace Sargent from the Henry Jackson Society says he's not surprised the UK government is pursuing a have-your-cake-and-eat-it strategy. He says many people are sceptical about the approach.
And we'd all like to reap the economic rewards that China offers, but there are deep concerns about our national security and also our ability to stand up for what's right and challenge China on issues like Xinjiang and Hong Kong.
Sargent says it's quite clear that engagement and trading with China has not made it more democratic or a responsible player in the world.
Instead, we've seen that China's actually wanting to reshape the rules for its own advantage, but also in its own image. If, for example, in relation to what we consider human rights norms and standards.
Sargent says democratic countries should work together to diversify their supply chains and become less dependent on China for important things like pharmaceuticals or PPE. Eddie Aiken, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, we have a special episode coming up this Friday. During the Cold War, nuclear arms were at the heart of the U.S.-Soviet Union race.
Just by being there, these weapons deter others from aggression and thereby serve the cause of peace.
Today, the struggle between democracy and communism continues, but the focus has switched from nuclear arms to something much smaller, microchips.
It has dramatically enhanced the Chinese Communist Party's military capabilities, and it is now enough a threat for the United States.
Containing Beijing's rise in the chip industry,
it's like pulling out Beijing's sharpest teeth.
But with U.S. and China deeply intertwined.
It's hard to hurt China without hurting ourselves.
In part one of this special report, we dive into the heart of U.S.-China competition and what we can do to stay ahead of the race. In part one of this special report, we dive into the heart of U.S.-China competition and what we can do to stay ahead of the race. Be sure to check it out on Epoch TV this Friday at 9 p.m. China in Focus is partnering with a platform. That's where you can watch our exclusive content every Friday night. To subscribe, click epochtv.com/China in Focus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.